So a couple of things. I just want to remind everyone that our objective here is to really cultivate a community around connection and learning, and keep bringing it back. You know, the people skills has been a really incredible focal point for us, and we will continue to stick with it for a while. I think it's ripe, it's new, it's something that we can really evolve our comfort with, and our familiarity with over time. I know that last week Dave kept talking a lot about trust and how we get there, and he talks a little about the history. And I just want to put a little bit more foundation in with some of those things that he talked about. You know, he referenced, you know, what makes a great teacher, and ultimately that's why we're here. We're investing the time on you know, what that original question that was presented at Interski at Ushuaia around that response that came back with empathy, the response that is driving us in terms of here we are asking, like in this context at virtual Apres, we're asking how, right? Like, how do we do this? You know, how do we teach this, test it, train it? How do we as individuals own it and take responsibility for it? Right? And so cultivating that skill set so that we aren't just rolling out on the hill. And I attempted to come up with an example of this, moving a little more towards the technical skills that I think most of us are way more comfortable with when we talk about what that looks like. Is it this idea of, like, think about like someone who's up on the hill and they're ripping, right? Like, we're not talking about an instructor specifically, but someone coming to this idea with saying, hey, well, I know how to ski, so of course I can teach anyone, right? All of us here know that that's not really true. So it's almost like kind of re-emphasizing this idea that, you know, that just because you know how to use the thing, right? So just because you know how to use a pair of skis or a snowboard, you know, or cross-country skis or whatever it might be, or a tele ski, it doesn't necessarily mean that you understand how to teach it, right? So same thing transpires into the teaching skills when we're teaching skills. When we are teaching people skills, it forces us to dive in a little bit deeper and to actually be able to use words that meet the needs of the learner, right? And to be able to navigate with them as they develop the skill, right? We're all familiar, I will be looking for not an agreement, but I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with the learning's connections model. And so to be able to kind of move back to that student-centered approach and re-emphasizing, you know, we're touching into each of those three skill sets: the teaching, the technical, and the people. Awesome. Before we dive in too much more into our primary topics today, I just want to cover a couple of business items. My quote for today, right? Whatever the problem, be part of the solution. Don't just sit around raising questions and pointing out obstacles. It's from Tina Fey, right? A little bit of business. Janet, I appreciate your smile. All right. We have a new platform for our notes, right? So if you're looking for things, you're having troubles, please by all means reach out. Thank you to those of you who did. It's now based in Google Drive. There's a folder, and then there's going to be a dated sheet that will reference the notes where you can find a clickable link to log on to Zoom. What's great about that for me is that I can then kind of live update. I can also get some notes in there. It should also help you long-term. I know the adjustments like this are always really hard, so bear with us as we just kind of continue to work out some of the kinks. But really, you should be able to add a link to that folder, and then you'll be able to just reference back to that each week. Again, the links to the Zoom meeting is always the same every week. Something that I do when I have ongoing Zoom meetings is I just grab the actual link and I just drop it right into my calendar. And that way, when my reminder comes up 15 minutes before, I just hit the link that I've dropped into my notes. And then you can usually set a repeat on that notification for yourself, and then it will just show up. Take one step out of turn it into a habit. Excellent. A couple of other things. I believe everyone here has tackled this, but just in case, it's really helpful for us if you have your name listed first and last. In case something comes up in response after the meeting, we can then potentially email you, or if there's something, a couple of times, I know Kirsten's actually emailed everyone who's been in attendance, as long as we've been able to kind of research and figure out who you are. And then remote people skills with Jen Lockwood is starting on June 10th. That link can be found in the PSIA Northwest events calendar. So if you go there and click into the description, you will have to call or email or mail in a PDF. I think at this point it would be best for you to call in just to make sure that you have secured your spot. That is from 5 to 6 p.m. Pacific time. Hi, Darianne, welcome. And next week, June 12th, we have Ann Shorling from the PSIA national team. She's also the leader of the task force for people skills. She'll be talking to us a lot about the how. So we do keep coming back to the how, like how do we use these skills? How do we use the people skills? And what does it look like? What does it look like as a trainer? She's gonna be working with us on what it looks like that within the task force to be building out the performance standards and what that's gonna be for us. So as the users or as trainers, maybe a little bit of a window into what it might look like for exams as well. But expect that coming from her. And a lot of the work that you've done through our show here will really be leading into what she'll be talking about. So if you haven't had a chance, it might be helpful to at least go back and look at the notes from the previous sessions if you haven't been in attendance. All right, just checking over my notes here. And it does look like in the next probably 2 to 3 weeks, Katie Foyt from PSIA Northwest, who's a divisional staff member, will be joining us, and she is also serving on the national task force team for the people skills. So we should be looking to hear from her late June, early July. All right, so today, I almost feel like I've scared everyone off today because I brought up the feelings words. We are going to dive into, I appreciate how I'm seeing some smiles here for those of you who are just listening. I'm seeing some smiles and some like appropriate responses to maybe a little anxiety about having to talk about these things that we just don't ever get asked to speak about and to name, right? So what I want to do is I just kind of want to add a little bit more foundation before we dive into the activity that I offered. There is and was a clickable link within the June 5th show notes to a feelings worksheet. This is mine. I'm holding up a sheet showing you I have some notes here from me doing my own work. I do have to say that this took me a lot more thought than I expected, but I liked what actually came up for me. So I'm looking forward to sharing that and hearing what some of your experiences were like. All right, so a couple of things I want to make sure we touch on before we really start talking about, like, gosh, why on earth are you giving me a big giant sheet of feelings words? Like, what on earth are they going to do for me? I already know this. Whatever other, like, you know, whatever other details are showing up in your head right now, what other messages, what other voices that maybe somebody has told you along the way. Let's give a little bit more of a foundation to that. So referencing in, I want to read you the people skills fundamentals, right? And I'm going to let you look at them right here. All right, so the first one, develop relationships based on trust. All right, what that means is transparency, respect, cohesion, and risk, right? So that would be like risk management. Are you making thoughtful decisions for your student? All right. Number 2, engage in meaningful two-way communication. That means verbal communication, which we've talked about and referenced the Snow Sports Manual. It also means nonverbal communication, which we will get to in the Snow Sports Manual. It also means listening. It means feedback, which I think is slated for a future episode. Thank you, Matt. All right, and number 3, identify, understand, and manage your emotions and actions. That means self-awareness and self-management, which is part of the emotional intelligence. right? And number 4, recognize and influence the behaviors, motivations, and emotions of others, which is social awareness and social management. Those last 2 are the ones that we've really talked about the most so far. Those have been directly related to probably the first 10 pages in the people skills chapters in the snow sports manual. So that would be page 19 through about 28, right? And we will be picking back up and moving it. So something that I really appreciate that Dave said to us is that he really sees it all as the first one happens when the bottom 3 are achieved and they're used and they're incorporated. Right? And I think that that's something really awesome to think about. So all of this energy we're putting into building the skills and talking about what it looks like and saying, okay, oh, that word over there, what does it look like in action? Those things are building towards how do you have the outcome of a trust-based experience on snow with your student or with your clinic group. And one thing that I value personally and I see keep showing up in these conversations is that I want to know it's safe to fail. And that means I'm taking risk. So whether it's going out and trying something new technically, whether or not it's throwing out an idea that may or may not be pre-approved, I want to know that it's safe. And in order for me to feel like it's safe, I need to know that there's a trust-filled environment. So these are the stepping stones in that how to get there. Any questions, any responses coming up so far? I see contemplative looks. I appreciate that. and a good agreeing grin coming from that. Thank you for that. I like that. All right. So I do want to share one little mnemonic that I use to remember each of these fundamentals for the people skills. And it's me, you, us, trust. Okay? And that works great for me because and again, lots of other people will have lots of other things to offer you. This works great for me because it's really easy to remember. Me, you, us, trust. All right? Awesome. Okay, moving on. I'm going to touch on this lightly before we move forward. Is I want to make sure that we address the difference between prescriptive and adaptive. All right. So prescriptive when it comes to people skills, right? We've all heard them, and these are so important when it comes to especially a new instructor, someone who's new to an experience. Right? It's picking your goggles up, it's zipping up your coat all the way, it's smiling, it's offering a handshake, you know, it's offering eye contact, maybe smiling and offering a joke as well when you're welcoming your group. It's easing potential assumed tensions, right? Adaptive is being able to change and adapt to the group that you have or the person you have in front of you with an unknown, within the unknown. Right? So it might be that someone shows up, and if someone's gloomy and maybe they just look like they were shoved out to you, you know, to join you for a lesson, and grandma and grandpa said, good luck becoming the next Olympic racer, you know, and it's their first lesson. Thank you, Jerry Ann, for that. Right? You know, as an instructor, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? You've totally just squashed my lesson, right? If I go up to that person and say, hey, you wanna become an Olympian? You know, I may have missed, or I may have destroyed the relationship, or I may boost it. But that means I have to actually get out there and use my adaptive skills within the work that I've done on the how, right, of building these nuances and being able to look and say, oh, is their face down, that nonverbal communication? Do they really want to be here? Is their belonging being challenged, right? So being able to then adapt to the situation at hand, right? So it's not a do this, or I see this, do that. I see this, do that. Unfortunately, it's not linear, right? It's really hard. Like, human behavior is so complicated. And that's ultimately what we're doing, is we're taking this opportunity to increase our familiarity so that when the opportunity comes up to respond, right, in a thoughtful way or to adapt to the needs of my student, I have practiced it. I've practiced what it looks like to change the experience of my student. Right? Someone who doesn't want to be there or who has already decided because, you know, because you're wearing some shade of pink they don't like, that they don't want you as their instructor, to then have the experience of their best day ever. I think most of us here are familiar with the idea that the thing that brings our students back is us. We're the number one influence on a return student. And the thing that I reiterate to my to the school that I work for, and the things that I hear reiterated more than anything else, is success is a return student, or a student who leaves with a positive experience. And we can take responsibility for that by being thoughtful about how we respond, but it requires us to make sure that we've developed the skills to do that. How are we doing?
I have a question.
Yeah, Shannon, please.
So when you say you practice being adaptive, does that mean you practice through experience, or do you actually say go home and run scenarios through your brain of how you would react?
Shannon, I love this question so much. So both. The biggest thing I do is I personally will practice, say, responding. So I want to offer you a live example. So fall training this year, I gave a presentation on behavior management with my colleague, Sarah Ramsey. And one of the things I asked the audience to do was a practice around consent. And the objective was to get everyone to receive a reply to a question that they did not expect. So in that circumstance, the question was, may I touch you? And I had prefaced everyone within their partnerships to say no. And what I wanted everyone to get the practiced opportunity to do was to be able to then continue the relationship and move forward, and not make it about you being rejected, but to make it about your student having the courage to tell you no, because that wasn't okay for them. Right? So in these opportunities to use the people skills, right, it is important to practice. So using these things that we talk about here on the show, or that you see within the manual, and going at, even within social experiences or anywhere where you might be offering information to a learner, and to be able to pause and say, hey, it looks like we're not on the same page. It seems like what I'm telling you isn't landing. Can you tell me what you heard? And to see what it feels like. I'm going to tell you right now, it's really uncomfortable at the first few times. Yeah, I see a nod in agreement from Jerry Ann. Yeah, it's not easy. Yeah, Hero.
I'd like to add that basically what you kind of pointed out is it about me? Or I'm really concerned about the student or the person I'm dealing with. If they come first, then you ask a bunch of questions, trying to figure out what's going through them, not what's going through your head.
Thank you, Hero. That is awesome, and I love hearing that in that way. I think so often we get consumed with our own feelings, especially when we don't receive the answer that we're looking for, or when something is unexpected, or when our prescribed application of what we think the student wants instead of asking them is not what is expected. So if my student shows up and all they want to do is lay on the snow, we are usually judging ourselves and saying this is not successful. But the truth is if that student lays on the snow and makes a bunch of snow angels and they have the best day ever and they come back, that's a win. In my book, that's a win. And you know what I'm going to do for if we are colleagues on the Hill, I'm going to come and make sure you feel extra supported, because I know it is really hard to not get caught up on the judgment of the people around you. because so often we deem success by what chairlift that student got to, right? Oh, they rode this blue run on their first day. Yeah, but did they have a great time? Right? Because if they're off on you know, the highlighted blue run on your hill, they may not actually come back. Right? So we have a huge effect on our students. So it's really
possible.
Yes, please.
It's possible if they're on the snow like that. It's a coping mechanism too.
Yes. Ooh. I'm already putting together a whole nother show on coping mechanisms, misuse of feelings, right? Amazing. Okay, I do want to dip into, oh, all right, yes, Matt.
So Melodie, a little earlier when you said sort of non-linear in terms of communication and the building trust, and then you've said some things that have really struck me as fitting into the feedback cycle for technical skills in terms of desired outcomes, ski-snow interaction, movements to do that, and getting into that same sort of loop in terms of the student interactions and building the trust, that it isn't a straight line, that it's a continual check back and continual evolving of the desired outcome in terms of the communication kind of thing.
Matt, I love that. That's brilliant. Just to clarify, you're referring to this model, right?
Yes.
You know you're saturated in the snow sports industry when you can whip that one out.
Very close.
I just showed a picture of the feedback model coaster. That's great. Thank you. And I love the visual that you're offering for that. And Kirsten, thank you for dropping the link to that in the chat. I appreciate that. I think that so many of us are visual in the way that we see how we can move in a way that's not linear. Because so often, especially in formal education, we say step 1, step 2, step 3, right? You know, so many people say, oh, when you're not feeling good, can you just tell me the things to do for you? And it's like, well, unfortunately, it's not that easy. All right, let's make sure we talk about feelings, because I do want to make sure that we have touched on this before Anne joins us next week. So what I want to do is just very quickly touch on each one of the steps that you were asked to do. Did anyone do this before you joined? Oh, I see a couple hands. Yes, yes. Oh, I've got a smirk of denial from Matt. I appreciate that. Okay, well, don't worry. It's there if you ever want to use it in the future. So step 1 was circle up to 10 feelings you feel the most comfortable with. So in front of me, I've got a list of probably 50, 60 feeling words that have all evolved off of our core feeling words. If you have a lot of experience with verbalizing emotions and feelings, you'll know that they derive mostly from, and this is arguable, so, which we're not going to, I'm going to deflect from getting into, something along the lines of fearful, bad, angry, sad, disgusted, surprised, happy. There's variations on that you can find out there if you like, but most of these kind of evolve from that. But the idea is that as we get more specific, right, we have a bit greater understanding of what's actually going on for that person when it comes to a feeling. So the first one ask was, come up with the words that you feel comfortable with. How did that go for those of you who had a chance to work on this on your own? Was it good? You can just give me hand gestures or maybe some nonverbal communication. I'll take it.
It was good. I was surprised when I started to look at the list how many were negative.
Oh, I love that observation. I share that. Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, I almost wanted to count them. And I'm like, no, I'm going to use my time elsewhere. Like it feels like 75+% of them are negative. So they're describing the details of that negative experience. Yeah, Hero.
So I added some.
Yeah, I like that. So the idea for this was just to remind yourself words that you're comfortable with. And most likely those were probably your go-tos. Right? Those were probably the words like, oh, I know what that looks like. I use that one a lot. Okay, that's good. Right, so the next ask is 10 words or so that you are uncomfortable with. Maybe you don't actually know what that looks like. You never use the word. What was that experience like?
It was either I'm not familiar with it or I don't want to see it.
Oh, ooh,
I don't
like
want my
that.
student to be feeling that.
Oh, that's so, I appreciate that honesty. That's huge. Like, yeah, I don't want to see my student be baffled by whatever I've maybe asked them to do. Right?
Or
Awesome.
disgusted.
Disgusted.
Threatened. Violence. No good. No good.
Oh, I'm with you. Amazing. So then the third one was really kind of looking for some self-awareness, right? And it could have been multifold. So the ask is for you to pick somewhere between like 3 and 8 words that are used to describe you most. So you could take this 2 different ways. So it could be what other people say about you or how you see yourself, right? And I would actually guess that it's probably a little different, right? What did anything specific show up for anyone on those? No. All right, I'm gonna. Oh, Hero, yeah.
It was easier for me to have my own opinions of myself. That's the problem.
I like it. We could just highlight what we think of ourselves and disregard anything else. Nice. Yeah, I personally found that I had some very specific words that I was moving towards when I was really trying to think about what other people think about me, and those feeling words, like saying, oh, okay, you know, they think I'm, you know, silly or excited or, you know, or curious. But here's the thing that I noticed that really drummed up a little frustration for me is that every time I kind of slammed my pen down and I said, it depends on the person. Every time I looked and I said, well, it doesn't, none of this matters unless I know what I'm talking about. Which for me meant that, yeah, I might know exactly what afraid looks like, but it depends on who it is. You know, some people disguise that particular feeling much better than others. So I want to speak to the purpose of this. So the purpose is that we want to, it's really valuable within the context of the people skills to be able to start using specific words to name behaviors, right? So an example that I personally feel like is very tangible is being able to go, the difference between a greeting that says, you know, hey, you know, hey Matt, it looks like you're feeling pretty well today. How's it going? Oh no, so I'm wrong. But guess what? Now we get to talk about feelings.
Yeah. But remember, I don't have feelings.
Oh, right, sorry. Right? So what I missed, I was wrong, right? But Matt, how might you respond to that?
It was a rough week at work. We had some issues come up that I have no idea how to challenge and deal with. And yeah, it was rough. So
thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And that sounds hard. So that's a completely different interaction. And Shannon, something that you can practice, right? That's tangible. Instead of moving in and looking and going, nice to see you, or how's it going, right? And accepting good, right? We're not really looking for a grocery store interaction. We're looking for more of an in-depth experience that can move towards trust, right? So I have a little homework that I encourage you all to try, and I'm fairly confident that Anne will bring up some version of this. Is that using first of all, get it wrong, just like I did with Matt. It looks like you are feeling, right? Give yourself a chance to name a feeling and try something really weird, right? Especially with people you do have trust-based relationships with. You know, go up to a friend maybe and look at them and say, like, hey, it looks like you're feeling really afraid. Right? And see what you get out of them. I'm not afraid. I'm actually really happy. But you get a chance to open up a feelings-based conversation. Right? And what's really interesting to me about this is that you don't have to actually dive into a big, deep feelings-based experience yourself, right? You can stay supportive of the person that you're speaking with, right? It is ideal if we're moving into empathy, as Dave has talked about, and we've talked a lot about here, is to have some of those feelings, but that's not necessarily part of the required process to be able to perform when we're talking about building the skill. Right? How's everyone doing? Right? It's 5 o'clock. In fact, it's 5:01. Holy moly, time flies. I know I've done a lot of talking today, and I want to thank everybody. I do encourage you to fill out your feeling sheet if you want to. I really appreciate some of the experiences that showed up for me in naming these. There's also another great resource that I want to direct you to if you just Google kind of haphazardly the feeling wheel. It gives a really nice drawback to those core words that I mentioned that are sort of that are more named as the root for feeling words, and it gives you more descriptive, detailed words in the way that it moves out. So have a glance at that if you want. I will put a link to arbitrary one that I find on the interwebs to make it easy for you. Remember, next week, Anne Shorling, she's going to be digging way more into the how, what it looks like, performance guidelines, and whatnot. So if you have any, and especially your colleagues, if you or your colleagues have any questions about what it might look like in exams or in the standards, this is a great chance to get an opportunity to ask your questions. I love getting your questions, your feedback and whatnot. If you have anything specific to a show, try to get that to me before Friday at noon. And you can find my email address in a plethora of places, but most easily within the event description, and then click through into the Google folder for the show notes. Any questions before we sign off? Yeah? Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thanks for sharing your afternoon with me. And if you have questions or you're like, oh my gosh, I just need to talk this through, let me know. I love nerding out on this stuff. And and now we've got our cameo from a pup. That just makes me have a rad. Kirsten, do you want to add anything?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Have an awesome weekend and be well.